Oops. So, I had to make a video. I didn't know what I was going to make a video on because I have to have inspiration before I make some kind of a video of some kind. So I just ask a random question from AI, and this is what I got. Let me see. Let's go ahead and add this here screen, share screen. And it's in the description as well, but I'm going to show it here. It's on James' tour. Recent video, hook, line, and sinker, how YouTubers fell for the RNA world. But here we go. Let's see if I can amplify this a bit. Okay. Let me see if I can fix the frame on this thing here. Should have fixed it already, but okay. Anyways, now maybe it'll work. Oops. Guess maybe not. Okay, here we go. Let me open this up. Okay. Anyway, it's not going to cooperate here, I guess. Unless I do the size, which I shouldn't be messing around with too much, but anyway, that's about it. So anyways, in spite of the distraction and delay, so this is the response. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this response and put it into Grok and see what Grok has to say about it, see if Grok agrees with it. So I asked the AI, the other AI, about how rare beneficial mutations are that do not result in a loss of information. In other words, they're adding more information, not losing information. So here's the response. Beneficial mutations that increase functional information, e.g. creating new enzymes or structures, are extremely rare, while most, even if beneficial in a specific context, often result from a loss of or degradation of function. So even the ones that are beneficial are from a loss. Studies suggest a very low ratio, So now, of course, if you were raised a Christian, if you've been a Christian a while, you know that God is real, you know the creation is real, because of many reasons, many scientific reasons, but here's just one reason right here, and it's that the ratio is so low, beneficial to harmful mutations, it's approximately 0.00041, with many of the supposed beneficial changes actually being adaptive in specific environments while, get this, while causing a net loss of complexity. So basically, there's no such thing as a beneficial mutation. So let me go to Grok here. See what Grok says here. start a new conversation here. Okay. So I'm going to say, would you agree with the following? And would it be safe to say beneficial mistakes for all practical reasons without causing a loss of information? Okay, that's a question mark. And put in the following. Paste. Okay. So that's the whole entire statement. Let's see what Grok would come up with here. Would you agree with the following, and would it be safe to say that beneficial mistakes don't really occur for all practical reasons without causing a loss of information? Beneficial mutations, we already read this. So let's see what Grok says. Hold on. Thinking. Yes, I largely agree. So if this is true, then evolution is non-existence. Evolution is actually non-existent. Yes, I largely agree. I largely agree with the thrust of your statement, with some important nuances and qualifications based on empirical data from evolutionary biology, experimental evolution, and population genetics. Of course, you got to throw in the consensus in there. Beneficial mutations are extremely rare relative to deleterious ones. Studies in model organisms like bacteria, E. coli, consistently show that the vast majority of mutations with fitness effects are deleterious or lethal, while beneficial ones represent a tiny fraction. Estimates of the beneficial mutation rate per genome per generation are often on the order of non-existent or lower in well-adapted populations, depending on the environment and strain. For example, in one analysis of E. coli, the rate of beneficial mutations was estimated as around 1 times 2 to the that was around 2 times 10 to the 9th power per genome per replication, or -9, compared to the deleterious ones that are 1 or 2 to 8 times 10 to the 4, a ratio on the order of 10 to the 5 or smaller. Other workplaces and ancestral mutations around 0.00041 per genome per generation for synonymous, mostly neutral changes, with non-synonymous changes showing a high proportion deleterious, implying a 0.8 per 20% deleterious among non-synonymous, but overall beneficial fraction much lower. Direct experimental evidence often put the fraction of beneficial mutations among those with fitness effects at less than 1%, sometimes 0.0001 to 0.01 in specific contexts. Cited ratio aligns closely with some measured deleterious neutral rates. One study as baseline synonymous rate, but the beneficial to harmful ratio is typically even lower than the figure might suggest when considering all mutations. Beneficial mutations are orders of magnitude rarer than deleterious ones in well-adapted populations. You can say goodbye to evolution. It's non-existent. Many, perhaps most, observed beneficial mutation in experimental evolution do involve some form of loss, degradation, or relaxation of function, rather than a straightforward gains in complexity or novel functional information. So even the claim of a beneficial mutation is not beneficial because it's a loss of original information. So if you're always losing information, that's not a good thing. And of course, you're never going to gain information. You're never going to gain information or gain a function or gain more information. Viable, functional, useful, compatible information. It's not going to exist. Okay. Rather than the straightforward gains in complexity or novel functional information. This is especially true in short-term adaptation when populations face novel stress or stresses. That's what they always try to throw in your face, is a novel stress. They throw that up in your face like that and try to say that causes beneficial mutations. Loss of function mutations such as gene knockouts, nonsense mutations, or promoter disruptions frequently drive adaptation by eliminating costly or unnecessary gene products. Right, because it's always costly. In order to have DNA, to run DNA, it's costly. It costs energy. And so if it's not any good, it's likely to be eliminated. Restoring imbalance are simply regulatory networks. Meta-analysis of experimental evolution in yeast and bacteria show loss of information mutations as major drivers in short-term adaptation. Right. For example, they found a frog in a stream that lost its lung capacity. The reason why it lost its lung capacity was because the frog was in a fast-moving stream of water, and it didn't need to breathe as much because it was absorbing oxygen through its skin, and it didn't need to use its lungs as much, so it just made the lungs smaller. But that's not a gain of function. That's not a beneficial mutation. And that's even That's even just responding to the environment. It's a response to the environment. It's not even by way of mistake or a copy and error. Copy and error didn't shrink the lungs of the frog. It's adaptations. Less is more. Adaptations. Inactivating genes can be beneficial when their function becomes maladaptive in a new environment, disabling costly pathways or sensors. Classic examples like citrate utilization in Linsky's long-term E. coli experiment or nyelinase evolution often involved regulatory changes, promiscuity exploitation, or loss of specific rather than de novo creation of highly complex novel enzymes from scratch. Of course, you're not going to get highly novel enzymes from scratch. Of course not. But that's what's required for evolution. True increases in function or in functional information, such as evolving genuinely new enzymatic activities, novel structures, or complex multi step pathways, which a lot of activity in the cell is multi step pathways, are much rarer and typically require multiple mutations, gene duplication, and divergence or recruitment of promiscuous activities followed by refinement, even in those cases. Initial steps often rely on pre-existing weak, I don't know what this means by promiscuous functions, not pure novelty. Or I think they're trying to say opportunistic. I'm thinking what they mean is opportunistic changes. Refinement mutations improve efficiency, but may not always add net complexity in informational terms. May not always, probably not ever. For all practical purposes, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. You're never going to increase any information by making mistakes. And a lot of these beneficial changes aren't even talking about beneficial mistakes. Okay, for all practical purposes, in most natural experimental contexts, especially short term, medium time scales, and well adapted populations, beneficial mutations that do not evolve some loss, degradation of pre existing function, or specificity are exceedingly rare. The ratio strongly favors deleterious or loss of information linked benefits, and pure gains of functional information without compensatory losses elsewhere are not a frequent driver of adaptation. Okay, in summary, yes, your characterization is broadly accurate and well supported by literature. Adaptation always proceeds via breaking or simplifying rather than building elaborate novelty from nothing, especially when the ratio of beneficial to harmful is so lopsided. This does not preclude rare stepwise gains over longer evolutionary timescales, but practically loss linked benefits dominate observations. Okay. Now, what if you only included uh, Okay, what if you only included beneficial copying errors? How common would they be? Because you can't appropriate or try to use what is a credit to the creation as evidence of evolution, which is what they keep trying to do all the time. You can't do that because the only mechanism for evolution is copying errors. When you already have a genome, a functional genome, that's a credit to the genome that's already there. That's not a credit to any evolutionary process. Okay. Of course, this has been a pet peeve of mine for over 60 years now, believe it or not. So it's about time we just toasted evolution once and for all for good. Okay. Okay, what if you only included beneficial copying errors? How common would they be? If we restrict the question to only beneficial copying errors, beneficial mutations, excluding neutral, deleterious, or lethal ones, their frequency is extremely low, far rarer than the already tiny overall beneficial fraction in most contexts. In well-adapted populations like E. coli strains in stable environments, empirical estimates from experimental evolution, mutation accumulation, fluctuation tests show the total mutation rate is roughly 10 to the third mutations per genome per generation, often 0.001 to 0.003 for base substitutions and small indels in E. coli. The beneficial mutation rate, the number of beneficial mutations arising per genome per generation, is orders of magnitude lower. Okay. Direct estimates from early adaptation dynamics or competition assays often place UB around 10 to the 9 or 10 to the 5 per genome per generation, depending on the study environment and how beneficial is defined in any detectable fitness increase versus strong effects that fix. Of course, it has to fix in the population. A commonly cited range, E. coli and glucose, limited conditions, strongly for generations for strongly beneficial mutations that drive observation adaptation. One classical estimate from adaptive dynamics in evolving populations put the rate of beneficial mutations at about 4 times 10 per cell per generation. In some contexts, strong stress or novel environments, the effective beneficial supply can appear higher temporarily, but in well-adapted states is closer to the lower end. Per site rates are even tinier. Total point mutation rates per base per generation, often 3 to 5 per base substitutions in wild E. coli, beneficial mutations per site per minuscule fraction that only a tiny proportional possible changes at any given site are beneficial, often 0.001 the frequency. Okay, how common would they be in practice? In bacterial population, typical size cell flask, a beneficial mutation might arise once every few hundred to few thousand generations. So a beneficial mistake beneficial copying error would arise once every few hundred to few thousand generations across the entire population. Across the entire population. In Linsky's long-term evolution experiment with E. coli, beneficial mutations that they have to be fixed, and drove major fitness gains occurred at rates implying roughly one significant adaptive step every few hundred to few thousand generations per population. But many more small effect beneficial mutations arose and competed without fixing. So, well, even if there was a beneficial mistake, other populations wouldn't compete with it and it wouldn't be fixed in the population. In natural or less optimized environments, beneficial mutations can be more frequent if the population is far from a fitness peak during colonization of a few niche antibiotic exposure or metabolic shift, but even then, they remain rare relatively to deleterious ones. But I'm only focusing on the actual beneficial mutation because if you want evolution to happen, you have to have beneficial copying errors. That's the only mechanism that exists for evolution. Because anything else is attributable to the existing design that's already there. If you want to change the design that's already there and get a new design, you need beneficial mutations, which are basically non-existent. And even if they do occur, they'll be outcompeted by another population. True de novo gains in functional information, new enzymes, pathway, etc., are rarer still, often requiring multiple coordinated mutations, which is the thing. It's multiple coordinated mutations that have to be complementary to the rest of the genome and to the immune system and everything. So single copying error events that are purely beneficial without any loss degradation component are exceptionally uncommon. In short, if you only include beneficial copying errors, you'd be left with events so infrequent that for all practical purposes in most biological contexts, they would be vanishingly rare. In other words, non-existent. Populations rely on the rare emergence of these mutations, often amplified by large population sizes, to adapt, which is another thing. If you have large population sizes, then you can have more variation. But if you have larger animals with smaller population sizes and longer lifespans, you're going to have even less beneficial changes. But the overwhelming majority of copying errors are neutral or harmful. This lopsided distribution is a core reason adaptation is slow and stepwise, specifically in well-adapted systems. So the only changes you're getting is adaptive changes and responses to the environment. It's not going to change what the animal was ordered to be. There's not enough time, there's not enough area, there's not a big enough population for evolution to ever occur, besides the fact that there's more deleterious and harmful mistakes. So anyways, that pretty much fries evolution. Which is what I would like for people to understand everywhere around the world, because people are lied to and they believe the lies. They believe it. Here's Adam. Good to see you working on this topic. There you go. Working on this topic. Yep. So, yeah, I like working on different things. You know, I don't like to work on the same thing all the time. But I guess this is a video that it's been a while since I made one on evolution. But that's because it's virtually non-existent. Pretty much non-existent as far as I'm concerned. So by way of review, wherever it is, beneficial mutations that increase functional information, creating new enzymes or structures, are extremely rare, while most, even if beneficial in a specific context, often result from a loss or degradation of function. Studies suggest very low ratio of beneficial to harmful mutations, approximately 0.00041, with many beneficial changes actually being adaptive in specific environments, while causing a net loss of complexity or net loss of information. So, evolution is toast. It's completely toasted. Now all we have to do is get the message across to everybody that it's completely toasted. So that'll do it, probably for this time. I don't know. That's good enough. I messed this video up good. I turned the light off because it was kind of annoying, but now it's dark. Oh well. And I had problems today. I went to ride my four-wheeler out in the snow banks, and it cut out and had a broken spark plug wire. So I taped that back together and went back on the slopes for a little bit. But it was fun. So, at least it's working. At least it runs. So everybody take care. God bless, and stay close to the truth. And don't worry about a thing. Don't worry about a thing as far as creation is concerned. We have a creator, and that's that. Just take his word for it. There's no other possible way. You can't have matter or elements making and directing themselves. The elements themselves are working parts inside of us. How often have you seen a working part make itself? How often have you seen a working part order itself? It doesn't happen. You can count on it. Everybody take care. God bless.